"You don't belong here, old man. My mom runs this place." And I said, "Get out of our pool." Brevin Rail's voice rang out like he owned the sky, chest puffed, towel slung low on his hips like a badge of entitlement. He stood just past the shallow end, grinning like he'd already won. Behind him, the HOA contracted security guard hovered, one hand on his radio, the other on his holster, as if the real threat was me, standing in flip-flops with a towel slung over my shoulder. My daughter was still dripping from the water. She froze mid-step on the concrete. "That's Dorian Vexler," Brevin added louder, for everyone to hear. "He doesn't live here. My mom said to blacklist his fob. He's trespassing." Clorinda Roll, president of Shoreline Grove's HOA board and mother to this preening parasite, had been looking for a reason. And Brevin, he just gave her one. Loud, public, on record. I didn't flinch, didn't raise my voice. I turned just enough so the light hit the small glint of metal clipped to my keyring, the fob they claimed didn't register. That's strange, because this device still pings back to my own server, and I just logged my daughter in. What they didn't know, I helped write the firmware for their access control system back when I was still building cover identities. What they couldn't know, this pool gate, this HOA, was part of a wider pattern. One that ended with Clorinda's name flagged across 3 jurisdictions. If you've ever watched someone try to humiliate you in front of your kid, if you've ever been forced to choose silence over pride, subscribe now. You're going to want to see how this ends. My name's Dorian Vexler, FBI Technical Surveillance Unit. But here, I'm the quiet single dad in Unit 41C, the guy who moved in 6 months ago under a clean alias, the guy who keeps to himself, pays in cash, and has no visible affiliations on the HOA registry. Let them think what they want, that I'm a ghost, a squatter, an afterthought. The truth is, I came to Shoreline Grove for one reason, to catch them doing exactly what they just did, not because of ego, because of Alinea. She was 11 the first time a neighborhood turned on us, when a weaponized HOA fine spiraled into a CPS visit. They said I let her roam too freely. They said I was combative in board meetings. They said I manipulated gate logs to let in unapproved guests. But what they didn't know, what they never knew, is that I built the surveillance systems they abused. We lost that house, that swing, that sunrise we watched every Sunday. After that, I promised her we'd never be caught defenseless again. So, when Shoreline Grove's HOA started mirroring the same violations, erratic fines, unexplained blacklists, digital access tampering, I took the assignment, quiet, clean, no badge, no backup, just me, a daughter I swore to protect, and a system I was going to dismantle from the inside. Today was supposed to be her piece. We'd just finished setting up our towels. She was finally laughing again, finally trusting this place might be different. I watched her cannonball into the pool while the sun broke through the palm fronds. She looked like every ounce of joy I'd tried to preserve through 1,000 compromises. And then Brevin showed up. Clorinda's golden son. Raised on power he didn't earn and HOA policies twisted to fit his tantrums. And the moment he saw us near his pool, he called security, lied to their faces, spoke for his mother like he owned the gate. The guard stepped closer. "Sir, if your name isn't on the access list, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I glanced at the LED panel still blinking green behind us, still active, still registered. "I'm not going to argue," I said, resting a hand on my daughter's damp shoulder, "but I'll be submitting a formal incident report for this. And for the record, that gate just logged my access 97 seconds ago." The guard hesitated. Brevin didn't. "That list's been updated. You're nothing here." Alinea turned toward me, towel clutched tight. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, baby." I crouched beside her. "You just got caught in someone else's lie." We walked through the gate together, but not in defeat, in control. Because while Clorinda was busy deleting logs, she never noticed the mirror server I'd buried in the fiber backbone 6 months ago. Every scan, every override, every silent admission of guilt. They didn't blacklist me, they triggered me. By morning, the violation notice was already in my inbox. Unauthorized access to HOA amenities, fine, $1,500. Further violations will result in permanent suspension of privileges. No signature, no explanation. just a PDF with a timestamp and a dead-end link to dispute. I stared at it for a full minute before forwarding it to my backup channel with a 3-word subject line. They moved first. Shoreline Grove's HOA portal, like most private neighborhood systems, ran on a 2-tier server, one layer for visible resident interaction, another for internal administration. The access logs attached to my violation had no metadata, no pingbacks, which told me one thing: someone had scrubbed them, or more accurately, replaced them with fabricated entries. Clorinda Rowell didn't just want me out of the pool, she wanted me out of the community, but not through confrontation. That wasn't her style. She preferred the slow rot, small fines that accumulated, fabricated violations that triggered Clause 7B, lien-eligible status. I'd seen her kind before, HOA tyrants who knew how to smile while quietly bleeding you out. Alinea came downstairs, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. She stopped at the fridge and pulled out a juice box before looking at me. "Are we leaving?" The words hit harder than they should have. She didn't even ask what happened, just assumed the outcome. "No," I said. "Not this time." "Because we're fighting them?" "No," I repeated. "Because we already won. They just don't know it yet." She nodded once. She didn't need more. She trusted me. But what I needed now was data. Not just what Clorinda removed, but what she'd inserted to justify the escalation. So I logged into the resident portal. 4 new violations had been quietly added to my profile over the past 90 days, all marked delivered by hand with digital signatures, none of which I'd ever seen before. Improper trash bin placement, failure to respond to a landscaping notice, unapproved exterior holiday lighting, and now unauthorized pool access. It was a paper trail built in reverse. Backdate enough trivial offenses, and suddenly the HOA had grounds to issue serious fines, grounds that looked legally valid to outside institutions. It was how they bullied elderly residents into moving, how they foreclosed on a family last year for missing 2 hearings they were never notified about. This wasn't a rogue president. It was a culture of control. I ran a checksum comparison between my mirrored logs and the current access list. Brevin's ID had 3 overrides tied to my timestamp: 1 denial, 1 blacklist, and 1 manual flag insert from the admin console. The manual flag meant someone had accessed the server directly, physically, within the last 12 hours. That narrowed it down. Clorinda, or someone working under her. I closed the terminal and glanced at the clock. 9:13 a.m. The HOA held office hours every Tuesday and Friday between 9 and noon. It was Tuesday. I pulled on a collared shirt, scanned the violation again, and printed it out. Not for a confrontation, but for a performance. Alinea stayed behind with her summer reading and a walkie in case she needed me. She knew the drill: low profile, quiet doors, watch for shadows. I walked the half block to the HOA clubhouse. Palm trees rustled above, birdsong softened the curbs, and everything looked exactly the way Clorinda wanted it to. Curated, calm, clean. The lie of it made my skin crawl. Inside, the office was cool and silent. White walls, marble floors, a fake orchid on the welcome desk. And behind that desk, typing with meticulous precision, was the woman herself. Clorinda Rowell, blonde in that careful, stiff way that says money protects her from consequence. She wore a beige sheath dress and a cardigan the color of expensive bone china. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. "You'll need an appointment, Mr. Vexler." "No, what I need," I said, holding up the notice, "is an explanation for this." She glanced at it but didn't take it. "Violations are handled through the portal. If you'd like to contest it, you're welcome to—" "You filed 4 of them," I interrupted. "Backdated, all within the last quarter, all marked hand-delivered, none of which I received." Her smile didn't shift. "Then perhaps—" "You should check your porch more thoroughly." She was baiting me, hoping for anger, hoping I'd snap and give her a reason to escalate. But I didn't come here to shout. I came here to watch her lie, up close. I leaned in, voice low. "Keep the fine, keep the system. Just remember, nothing you delete ever really disappears." For the first time, her gaze faltered. I didn't look back as I left the clubhouse. I didn't need to. Clorinda's silence told me everything I came to hear. The kind of silence that only happens when someone's mask cracks, just for a second, because they realize they're not the only one with leverage. but leverage needs patience. And the next step was knowing who else inside the boardroom was close enough to the rot to smell it, but too scared to say it out loud. That's where Aloan Price came in. I'd clocked her weeks ago, sitting at the side table during HOA meetings, always 3 steps behind Clorinda, always quiet. She handled the system logs, resident key fobs, and internal communications. Technical secretary, but not on the voting board. And every time Clorinda twisted policy to her liking, I saw Aloan flinch, not visibly. Just a pause, a single breath longer than normal. People like her don't speak first, but they listen, and they remember. So the next time I saw her, Thursday morning, on the side path behind the maintenance shed, I didn't approach. I waited until she passed, then dropped a sealed envelope in the small recycle bin near the tech entrance. It was labeled with a date and timestamp. Inside, a printout of the falsified pool access log and the checksum discrepancy. No message, no threat, just data. Either she'd ignore it, or she'd start to wonder who I really was. By Friday, my answer came. The change was small but deliberate. My resident portal no longer showed 4 violations. Only 3. The holiday lighting notice was gone. No record, no explanation. Clorinda wouldn't have erased it. That kind of cleanup wasn't her style. She liked to bury people under paperwork, not grant them silent mercy. Which meant Aloan had interfered. It wasn't an admission. It wasn't even help. But it was a choice, and choices like that leave trails. That afternoon, I walked the long way around the clubhouse, took the service stairs, and found myself standing in front of the internal server door. Access was supposed to be board only, but I knew from the architectural schematics, acquired legally as part of my security consulting assessment, that the digital entry pad still had the manufacturer's default override protocol. Clorinda was arrogant enough to think no one would dare touch it. I didn't need to go in, I just needed to know who had. I placed a magnetic logger over the panel and waited 15 seconds. It flashed once, 2 unique entries in the last 72 hours. The first, Clorinda Roll. The second, Aloan Price. There it was. I removed the logger, wiped the casing, and walked back toward the fountain path just as a door creaked behind me. Mr. Vexler? Her voice was quiet, uncertain. I turned slowly. Aloan stood in the shadow of the service hall, holding a small tablet against her chest like a shield. Her eyes flicked left, then right, and finally met mine. "You shouldn't be back here," she said, but her tone held no threat. "I'm not," I replied. "Just walking." She hesitated. "I saw what you left." "Then you saw the checksum discrepancy." I don't know what that means." Her lie was paper thin. She did know. She handled those logs every day, and she was scared. "I think you do," I said. "And I think you know something's been off for a while now." "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I said, "but it's already here." She looked down at the tablet, then back up. "They've started using the override protocols more often, not just on you, other residents, quiet ones, new families, older owners who don't push back." I waited, let the words hang. "You didn't come here for the house, did you?" she asked. "No," I said. "I came for the pattern." Her jaw tightened. "If I help you, if I even speak out, they'll destroy me. I've seen it happen." "They'll try," I said. "But if you stay quiet, they win, every time." She didn't answer, just nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned back into the hall. I didn't follow. The crack had formed, and people like Clorinda never see the flood until it's too late. The next violation came 3 days later, this time nailed to my front door. Not mailed, not digitally posted, nailed. Like a warning in an old western, as if Clorinda wanted the whole neighborhood to see it fluttering in the breeze. She didn't just want me fined, she wanted me humiliated. Final notice, violation hearing. Scheduled, property owner must appear before the board for disciplinary review. Failure to attend will result in permanent suspension of amenities and initiation of lien proceedings. It was dated 2 days earlier. I peeled it from the wood slowly, inspecting the corners. No HOA seal, no authentication code, just Clorinda's printed name at the bottom in all caps, no actual signature. Petty, sloppy, desperate. She was accelerating, and it made sense, because once someone like her senses resistance, their instinct isn't to reassess, it's to crush. No apology, no course correction, just pressure until the target cracks. Only this time, the target had already predicted her next 5 moves. I scanned the notice into my personal log and archived the raw image. Alinea stood behind me, quiet, her arms crossed tight. She hadn't asked about the last notice, but this one she read over my shoulder. What does Leon mean? I set the paper down. It means they want to try and take our house. Her eyes narrowed. But they can't. They can't win, I said. But they can try. We stood in silence for a moment, the kind that makes time move slower. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just looked older, a little more than yesterday. I hated what this place was teaching her, but I knew what to do with it. I spent the next few hours pulling access logs from the shadow server I'd planted when we moved in. My personal build ran independently, mirroring RFID pings, admin edits, and override calls from the HOA console. It was separate from the community server, off-grid, tamper-proof, and encrypted. Clorinda's override on my fob from last week, still there. Her time of access, 03:12 a.m. Unjustifiable for any legitimate administrative update. Then I pulled the flag entry tied to my violation hearing, created before the alleged pool incident. Dated 6 hours before Brevon's tantrum. She'd planned the blackout in advance. The whole "you're not on the list" moment was theater, manufactured. Brevon wasn't making a mistake, he was executing instructions. That detail made something tighten in my chest. She used her own son to carry out a stage confrontation against a federal officer. And she had no idea. Alinea had gone quiet in the next room. I found her sitting on the floor, tablet in her lap, schoolwork abandoned. She looked up but didn't speak. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded once, but I didn't believe it. "What are they doing this for?" she whispered. "We didn't do anything." "Sometimes," I said, kneeling beside her, "people with power feel safest when they make everyone else feel small." She blinked, slow and deliberate. "You don't feel small, because I've seen what they look like when they lose." She didn't ask how. She just closed her tablet and leaned against me, and we stayed like that until the sunlight moved from the floor to the wall. Later that evening, I walked the boundary of our property with a flashlight and a thermal lens. Not because I was paranoid, because Clorinda had a habit of using neighborhood watch logs as bait. I'd seen it in a previous case. Manipulate a report, trigger an overreaction, then punish the target for non-compliance with community protocols. Sure enough, just past the fence line, under the hedge near our mailbox, I spotted the faint glint of a motion sensor, unauthorized, low profile, buried halfway in mulch. I didn't touch it, just took the photo and marked the coordinates, violation of federal privacy law, tampering with mail access, and, depending on who she gave access to, a whole separate set of crimes. I sent the image to my secure server, then walked back inside. She was playing checkers. I was already playing chess. The violation hearing was scheduled for Tuesday at 8:30 a.m., a time guaranteed to keep working residents away and ensure Clorinda had full control of the narrative. The notice warned me to arrive on time and provide documentation for defense if desired. Defense. As if this were a trial. As if Shoreline Grove's clubhouse conference room were some neutral hall of justice. I didn't plan to bring evidence, not to them. But I would bring eyes. That morning, I showed up 10 minutes early and didn't walk through the front door. Instead, I entered from the east-facing side path, passing the utility closet where the fiber network linked back to the internal server stack. The server I had watched Aloan access. The one where Clorinda did her edits. The one they thought was private. It wasn't anymore. I leaned against the side wall, letting the rising heat press into my back. My phone buzzed once. The latest mirrored log had just arrived. I opened it. There it was. Clorinda had made another change at 2:12 a.m. that morning. She hadn't realized her own login credentials had been cloned after her last override. She had marked my property as in repeat violation status, a classification that would automatically escalate any minor infraction into a lien trigger within 72 hours. She was setting up the final move. That was her mistake. Inside, the meeting had started. Through the tinted windows, I could see 5 board members seated at the polished table. Only 3 had speaking authority. Clorinda was centered at the head, speaking into the room with the kind of smile that meant she already believed she'd won. I walked around, entered through the main doors, and stepped inside without waiting to be called. Clorinda glanced up, clearly annoyed. "Mr. Vexler," she said, "you were expected to check in." "I don't intend to speak," I cut in, keeping my voice flat. "I'm here to observe. This isn't a public session. It's listed as one on the HOA site," I replied, already pulling it up on my phone. "Open Forum Violation Reviews, Section 3, Clause G, Community Transparency." The man seated 2 chairs to Clorinda's left, board treasurer, I recognized, blinked once and shifted in his seat. Clorinda's lips thinned. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Take a seat." I did. They recited the charges, read the prior violations, fabricated nonsense, all of it. Alinia's towel left on a shared fence, improper mailbox ornamentation, loud noise after 9 p.m. on a Saturday when we weren't even home. Then they read the new one. Unauthorized access and use of HOA amenities under fraudulent credentials. Fraudulent. That was the word she chose. When it came time for me to respond, I looked directly at Clorinda. "Your gate logs were edited 3 times in the last month, all after midnight, all from your credentials." She didn't blink. "Our security systems are managed by authorized personnel only. You used the admin console at 03:12 on June 14th, again at 1:47 on July the 2nd, and again this morning." Her silence hardened. "How would you know that?" one board member asked. I smiled just enough to let them wonder. "I mirrored the system when I moved in, as part of a private residential security audit. You're welcome to ask Elowen." Clorinda stiffened. The mention of Elowen's name landed like a blade across the table. She hadn't told them, which meant the board didn't know someone inside had started cooperating. They still believed Clorinda's version of events. That wouldn't last. "I'm not contesting the violation," I continued. "I'm documenting it." Clorinda leaned forward, fingers laced. "We'll be reviewing your conduct and determining next steps. You'll receive formal notice by mail." "I'm sure I will." I stood, nodded once to the others, and turned to leave. But not before I noticed one thing. The board treasurer pulled out his phone, not to check messages. He took a photo of the printed violation packet and of the timestamp I'd displayed. A crack in the wall. Outside, the morning had turned hot and sharp. I walked home slowly, sunlight burning into my collar. The neighborhood looked peaceful, untouched, but under it, the edits had been made, and Clorinda had finally left fingerprints she couldn't erase. By the time I got home, the neighborhood had already started whispering. Not loudly, just the subtle kind of shift in energy that only someone trained to notice would pick up. A curtain that stayed open half a second longer. A dog walker who slowed down near my sidewalk. A voice cut short at the mailbox. Clorinda's weapon wasn't just policy, it was perception, and she'd cultivated Shoreline Grove into a place where rumors worked faster than facts. The next day, Alinia didn't want to go outside. She didn't say it in words. She just stood at the window with her book pressed against her chest, staring down at the now empty pool. "It's like they erased us," she murmured. I stepped beside her. The gate shimmered in the sun, pristine and locked. "They tried." "Are they winning?" I looked down at her, then shook my head. "Not anymore." She didn't ask what I meant, but I knew the moment was coming, the one where this conflict would push her into believing people like Clorinda always win. That silence is safety. That truth bends to whoever shouts louder. I had to change that. The next step had to be irreversible. That night, I opened the encrypted archive Elowen had slipped into the shared drive. It wasn't much, a small batch of raw logs, time-stamped and untouched. But the files mattered less than how she had shared them. She'd chosen to risk exposure, and that told me she was ready. I pinged her via the secure protocol I'd installed behind the resident portal login. She answered within minutes. The message was short. "Meet me after office close. Come alone." At 7:03 p.m., I waited behind the clubhouse's east annex, out of camera range. Elowen arrived 5 minutes later, holding a portable drive and a rolled-up blueprint. "This is all I have," she said quietly. "I've been collecting little pieces, but..." She's careful. I took the drive and nodded toward the tube. "What's that?" She hesitated. "Wiring layout. Internal system. The board never updated it, but I kept the original. The backdoor port is still active. She never knew. She unfolded it slowly, her fingers shaking just slightly. You said this is part of a pattern, that it's not just here. I met her eyes. It's bigger. But this is the last link. Clorinda's override history connects her to 3 other flagged HOAs. Same infrastructure, same software misuses, same forged logs. Eloan blinked hard, like she didn't want to believe it. I kept quiet for too long, she said. You kept proof, I said. And now it counts. She looked around once, then leaned in. They installed 2 new devices near the west units, not security cameras, infrared sensors, motion-activated, off-book. I think she's collecting movement data without declaring it to the board. That pushed things further than I expected. HOA rules allowed for contracted surveillance, but only with board approval, full disclosure, and annual renewals. If she was collecting behavioral data on residents without consent and feeding it through private analytics, that crossed into criminal territory. Clorinda wasn't just running a control scheme, she was harvesting residents like data points. And the more this built, the more I realized. I wasn't just here to shut her down. I was here to bury her methods before they spread again. I slid the portable drive into my back pocket and rolled up the blueprint. Thank you, I said. This is enough. Enough to stop her? No, I said. Enough to start the end. Eloan hesitated. If she finds out I shared this, she won't, I said. And even if she suspects, she'll be too busy covering the wrong tracks. I turned to leave, but stopped after 3 steps. When's the next board update? Next Friday, quarterly audit, treasurer has to present. I smiled. Perfect. Clorinda's fortress had cracks, and I had a plan. It started with rerouting the mirrored logs into a public transparency server, disguised as a performance testing module. It ended with federal hands knocking on her door. It started with a call, not from the FBI, not from a neighbor, from Eloan. No greeting, no hesitation, just 3 words. She's wiping everything. I was already moving. Back entrance of the clubhouse. Same path I'd used before. This time, I didn't bother avoiding the cameras. Let her see me. Let her feel the noose tighten a little more. Inside the tech suite, the screen glowed with confirmation. Clorinda's credentials were logged into the admin console. Time-stamped 3 minutes ago. System activity. Override in progress. She's targeting the override logs? I asked, stepping in beside Eloan. All of them, she said. Every access timestamp. All manual. Edits. She's purging the metadata trail. I expected this. After our last meeting, Clorinda had clearly felt something slip. She'd started probing the weak points, and whatever she'd seen, maybe the treasurer's phone camera at the hearing, maybe a hesitation from Eloan, was enough to trigger her. Let her finish, I said. Eloan turned to me, stunned. What? She thinks she's deleting it all, I said. But she's not wiping the logs, she's sending them straight into the tunnel. She stared for a moment, realization dawning slowly. You built a proxy route. 2, actually. 1 local mirror, 1 remote pipe to a cold server in Virginia. She laughed just once. Not from amusement, just that disbelieving exhale people give when a trap finally snaps shut around someone who thought they were untouchable. You'll need to act fast, she said. She's scheduling a firmware patch tonight. After that, she could lock out the tunnel and brick the system. She won't make it that far. I opened the secured channel on my device and uploaded the newly captured purge log to my handler. Then I sent the final trigger. Within seconds, the confirmation returned. Outside authority engaged. Proceed to prepare the scene. It was happening. I looked at Eloan. She didn't need to know what that meant. Not exactly. But her eyes narrowed just enough to guess. What now? She asked. Now you go home, I said. Act like nothing's changed. Don't touch the system again. Don't log in. Don't reply to emails. You're just a clerk again. A tired, compliant clerk who kept her head down and said nothing. You think she'll suspect me? She already does, but she's arrogant. She won't act without confirmation. She'll wait. She always waits. Eloan nodded slowly, then grabbed her bag and headed out through the side exit, disappearing into the tree line like a ghost. Once I was alone, I set up the final layer. I inserted a keylogger into the admin console, just under the status dashboard. Nothing invasive, just a shell script that would track her next login. If Clorinda accessed it again before morning, she'd reveal her physical location, MAC address, and active connections. I only needed it to fire once. And while it waited, I moved to phase 2. Back at my house, I pulled the treasurer's image from the HOA hearing, the one he'd snapped during Clorinda's monologue. I cleaned it up, enhanced the fine print, and ran a cross-check with the version Clorinda had posted on the HOA portal just 1 hour later. Discrepancy confirmed. Clorinda had altered the PDF after the hearing to remove my timestamp response and fabricate a refusal to comply, quote, she read into the minutes. It was enough. Enough to prove document tampering. Enough to invalidate the hearing's outcome. Enough to qualify as evidence manipulation in a civil dispute, possibly even criminal if the pattern held. Across multiple residents, I compiled everything into a sealed archive and included a forensic audit summary. It was late when I sent it, and quieter than usual in the house. Alinea had fallen asleep on the couch with her headphones in, curled around her sketch pad like it was armor. I sat down beside her, just for a moment, grounding myself in the only reason any of this mattered. She stirred but didn't wake. Outside, the street was still. But I knew what was coming. Clorinda had written her final edits, burned her final logs, and the system now held every fingerprint she thought she erased. The next morning, the board treasurer knocked on my door, not with confidence, not with backup, just a clipboard in his hand and something like doubt in his posture. "Can we talk?" he asked, eyes flicking to the street as if Clorinda might appear any second. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit, just stood there, clipboard pressed tight against his chest, like it was the only shield he had left. "I saw the violation packet again," he said. "The one from your hearing. The version on the portal doesn't match what I photographed." "You're sure?" He nodded. I checked the version history. It was edited at 2:18 p.m. The hearing ended at 2:05. "And you didn't authorize the change?" "Of course not," he said, almost offended. "That's not how we do things. Or, at least, it's not how we used to." His voice dropped. "She's been unilaterally updating reports for months. Most of us assumed it was for formatting. But this wasn't formatting. This was rewriting reality." I watched him carefully. His guilt was real. So was his fear. He hadn't known. But now that he did, the cracks were growing faster than Clorinda could patch them. "She's leveraged your silence for months," I said. "Every board decision rubber-stamped by members who stopped asking questions." He winced. "What do you need from me? Your login credentials, one-time access, just long enough to pull the original unedited archives. I need proof of the discrepancy." He hesitated, fingers tightening around the clipboard. "If she finds out," "She won't. You'll change your password the moment I'm done." He didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. "It's temporary," he said. "It expires in 12 hours. I took it without a word. By noon, I was inside the system under his credentials. Not through the HOA portal, but through the internal audit page Clorinda had disabled months ago, buried behind a non-indexed admin root. There it was, version history. 17 edits to the official violation documents over 6 weeks. Timestamps, user IDs, IP addresses, everything. Clorinda had done it all. More than that, she'd done it through an illegal bypass, using her personal machine to enter through the reserved backdoor port that only infrastructure, vendors should have had access to. That wasn't just fraud. It was unauthorized access under federal statute. I bundled the entire version tree, flagged each alteration, and submitted it through my secure FBI case feed. 5 minutes later, I got the signal. Proceed to final stage. Authority ready. It was time. That evening, I stood outside the community center, waiting as residents trickled in for the quarterly audit. Clorinda always treated these as performances, a chance to show off clean numbers, rising property values, and hand-picked compliments from fake surveys. But tonight, her show had a new act. At 6:58 p.m., she swept into the clubhouse in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, smiling as if she still controlled the air around her. She caught sight of me near the back and barely acknowledged me, just that faint dismissive glance before turning to the room. At 7:02, she tapped her gavel. "Let's begin." She breezed through the financials, recited committee reports, announced a refresh initiative for community landscaping, Then she paused. "I'd like to address a matter of escalating disinformation being circulated by a certain resident, Mr. Vexler, regarding the integrity of our digital systems." The room shifted, eyes turned. She continued, voice sweet and sharp. "Let me be clear. These accusations are false, unfounded, and a threat to the peaceful harmony of our community." And that's when the doors opened. 2 federal agents stepped inside. No vests, no shouting, just presence. Clorinda turned, confused, then pale. "Clorinda Roll?" one asked calmly. "We'd like a word regarding an ongoing federal investigation into digital systems fraud, falsified community records, and unauthorized data manipulation." The silence was absolute. She didn't speak. Couldn't. And when they let her out, the only sound was the quiet snap of her gavel slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor. She didn't scream. Clorinda Roll walked out with her head high and lips sealed, like the cameras weren't recording and the agents weren't real. But the tremble in her right hand betrayed her. She clutched her blazer sleeve like it was the only thing still in her control. The gavel stayed on the floor, untouched. I didn't move, just stood at the back of the room as the agents passed me, one giving a slight nod in recognition. That was the deal. I never appeared in the reports. I wasn't to be named, quoted, or credited. My operation had to remain invisible. As Clorinda disappeared into the hallway, the room stayed frozen. The board stared. Residents blinked in disbelief. Some exchanged glances. A few finally looked at me. Eloan entered quietly through the side door. She said nothing, but I caught the way her shoulders dropped, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks, maybe longer. The treasurer rose from his chair, slowly. "I believe," he said, voice a little shaky, "we'll need to pause the agenda until further notice." No one objected. The meeting dissolved without ceremony. Outside, the sun was gone. The air held the thick Florida weight, like rain was waiting for the wrong moment to break loose. I stayed by the gate, watching as neighbors filed out in stunned silence. Alinea was waiting for me on the porch when I got home. She didn't ask what happened. She just said, "You didn't let her win." I sat beside her, and for a while, we said nothing. Later that night, I checked the tunnel logs. The final access request had been logged at 6:43 p.m., exactly 15 minutes before Clorinda started her audit. She'd tried one last override, one last edit, but the system rejected her. The firmware had already been updated, her admin rights revoked, her back door closed. She was locked out of her own kingdom. I filed my last report at midnight, redacted, signed with my field code, case closure flagged as pending review. The digital trail was clean, the operation complete, but the part that stayed with me, the part I kept circling back to, wasn't Clorinda's fall. It wasn't the board's silence or the way neighbors pretended they hadn't watched this unfold in real time. It was Eloan. She showed up at my door the next morning, not out of fear, not for protection, but with a box. "Everything I didn't delete," she said. Photos, logs, copies of her directives, internal memos she never filed properly, just in case. "You ever need to prove it again?" I took the box. "You could have walked away," she shrugged. "I almost did, but when I saw your daughter, when I realized this wasn't just about some gate or key fob." She trailed off, eyes hardening. "This community forgot what the word means." I nodded. "So, what happens now?" she asked. "You'll help the board transition. They'll need someone who understands the system, and someone they can trust." She looked unsure. "I'm not a leader." "No," I said. "But you remembered how to do the right thing. That's more than most." She left quietly. No fanfare, no applause, just resolve. That afternoon I found Alinea sitting under the live oak near the pool, not swimming, just drawing. The pool gate was still locked, waiting for a new protocol to be installed. But she looked peaceful, not waiting, just present. And for the first time in months, she didn't look over her shoulder. I sat beside her without a word, watched the wind move through the leaves above us. And when she finally looked at me, her smile was small but certain. "She's gone?" she asked. "She won't be back?" She nodded. "Good." The drawing in her lap showed the pool, clean lines, sun overhead, people gathered. But in the corner, just outside the frame, she'd sketched a small figure, hands on the gate, watching through the bars. "She thought she owned this place," Alinea said. "She thought she owned everything. But you made it stop. No, I said. We did. The pool reopened on a Sunday. No announcement, no ribbon cutting. Just a quiet unlocking of the gate by the new interim chair, a neighbor named Howard Blaine, who used to keep to himself, but had apparently stepped forward once the smoke cleared. No one cheered, no one celebrated, but they came. One by one, families trickled out from behind fences, through narrow alleys, past their hedges, clutching towels and sunscreen, and folding chairs like they were rediscovering what community meant. Kids ran without looking back. Adults stayed near the edge of the water, hesitant, glancing at the clubhouse like Clorinda might still be watching from a window that no longer belonged to her. She wasn't. Her house had gone dark. The window signs were gone. Her Lexus hadn't moved in 4 days. According to a whisper passed down through Aloan, her attorney was working overtime trying to limit the scope of the charges. But the FBI didn't move until they were certain. And they were certain. The last override she ever attempted was enough to connect her to multiple HOA networks in 3 different counties. She hadn't just abused power, she'd sold access to it. Surveillance logs, access schedules, metadata on which homes were empty during holidays. All of it monetized. All of it gone now. I didn't go to the pool that morning. I stayed home, sat at the edge of the porch with coffee in one hand, and the neighborhood soundscape washing through me like something unfamiliar, not silent, not tense. Normal. Alinea came out just before 10. She wore her swimsuit under her shirt, towel draped across her shoulders. She stopped in front of me. "You're not coming?" "I think this is your win," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "You took down a federal-level HOA queen and turned her own system against her. That sounds like your win." I shook my head. "You showed up. That pool meant something to you. You didn't back down." She smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't tired. It was the kind of smile that only returns when the weight's finally lifted. I nodded toward the sidewalk. "Go. I'll be here when you get back." She didn't ask if it was safe, didn't double-check her fob, just walked down the path barefoot, the morning sun warming her shoulders, the neighborhood no longer pressing inward like it used to. I watched until she passed the gate. It blinked green, opened, and stayed that way. By noon, the clubhouse filled with voices again, not protests, not committee jargon, laughter, water splashing. Someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker, music echoing off stucco walls Clorinda used to inspect, with a measuring tape for aesthetic violations. The HOA was still intact. It hadn't crumbled, but the fear had. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter one last time, just out of habit, checked the server room locks, the fiber box by the electrical shed. The camera pings across the wireless repeater lines. No unauthorized traffic, no lingering fingerprints, just a clean line. Before sunset, I received a final message from my handler. Case 07V3X, status closed. No details, no thanks, just closure. Exactly how I liked it. I returned home, shut the mirrored tunnel, and deleted every local backup. The system now belonged to them, to Shoreline Grove, not to Clorinda, not to the software firm she funneled access through, not even to me. It was just a pool again. And when Alinea came home with wet hair, flip-flops squishing on the porch, I didn't ask what games they played or who talked to her. I just listened as she told me anyway. "The Trevors invited me over for lemonade," she said. "They've lived across from us this whole time." "They were afraid," I said. She nodded. "They're not anymore." We sat in the quiet, the way you do when the storm's finally passed and you're still listening for thunder just in case. But there was none. Clorinda's legacy had been erased, not by fire, not by outrage, by truth, and the quiet persistence of those who chose to resist. The next HOA meeting was different. No gavel, no podium, just a folding table set up near the pool patio, with chairs circled around like people were finally allowed to speak without looking over their shoulder. The board was half its previous size, 3 members remaining, none of them interested in holding power the way Clorinda had. Howard Blaine, the temporary chair, was nervous but honest. His printed notes shook slightly in his hands. No one mocked him for it. I sat in the back again, same as before, silent. Not because I had something to hide this time, because I didn't need to speak anymore. "First item," Howard said, glancing around, We're initiating a full system audit of all prior HOA violations issued in the last 12 months. Any fines issued without verifiable notice or physical delivery will be voided. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. And second, he cleared his throat. We're suspending use of the surveillance suite until an independent ethics review can be completed. No motion sensors, no backdoor access, no admin overrides. Someone clapped, then someone else. It wasn't loud, it wasn't organized, but it was real. Howard lowered his notes. If anyone has concerns, this is the place for them now. We're not hiding anymore. A woman across from me stood slowly, mid-40s, glasses, trembling hands. I was fined for late landscaping notices, twice. I never got them. Then they sent a threat to lien my home. Howard looked up. You still have the letters? No, they were digital, but I printed the emails. Submit them. We'll review everything. A man near the back raised his hand. What about Clorinda's records? Her edits? Do we even have the originals? Eloan Price stood before I could. We do, she said, calm, clear. They were preserved off-site, with copies, held by a federal agency for investigation. Eyes turned. People blinked. She didn't flinch. There's a lot we'll need to rebuild, she continued, but it starts with transparency and an admission that none of us were watching as closely as we should have. Howard gestured to her. We've asked Ms. Price to stay on as systems advisor for the interim audit. She's the only one who knows where all the wiring runs, literally and figuratively. The tension broke into something strange, like relief wearing the wrong coat. People exhaled, some even smiled. For the first time, they weren't trapped under rules they didn't understand. They were part of the rebuild. I stayed after the meeting ended. Not long, just long enough to shake Howard's hand and tell him to keep the structure flat. No titles, no power stacks, just rotating volunteers and open votes. He nodded. You're not leaving, are you? I raised an eyebrow. Would you prefer I did? No, he said quickly. We've had a hard time deciding if you were a neighbor or a ghost. I'm still here, I said, but I'll be quieter now. He smiled. Fair enough? The clubhouse lights dimmed behind us. Most of the chairs had already been stacked. No shouting, no orders barked across the patio, just footsteps on concrete and the sound of water slapping gently against tile. Eloan caught up to me near the gate. I submitted my resignation, she said, effective once the audit's complete. You sure? I didn't start this to hold a title. I just wanted to sleep at night. I nodded. You earned that. She hesitated, then glanced toward the pool. You think they'll keep it safe? They'll try, I said. And if not, you know how to spot the signs now. She gave me a faint smile. What will you do? Walk Alinea to school, maybe finally repaint the shutters. She laughed, light and tired. Normal sounds good. I watched her leave, then turned toward home. The stars were starting to show. The gate clicked softly behind me. The air smelled like wet concrete and flowering hedges. And for the first time since we arrived at Shoreline Grove, I felt like a resident, not a warning. The morning after the meeting, the pool gate shimmered in the sunlight like it had never been part of a war. It was early, barely 7, and Alinea was already in her swimsuit, standing barefoot on the patio with her towel wrapped like a cape. She waited, not for permission, but for acknowledgement. Her eyes caught mine, asking the question without words. Go ahead, I said. She pressed the fob against the reader. The light blinked green. The gate unlocked with a soft electronic sigh. No alarms, no denied access, no hidden overrides waiting to twist truth into punishment. Just open. She walked through first, her hand brushing the cool metal rail as if it were something sacred. The water rippled, catching the morning sky in fragments of blue and gold. She hesitated at the edge for half a second, then dove. Her splash broke the silence, and something in me unclenched that had been locked for months. For the first time, it wasn't about winning. It was about ending. I sat on the bench under the oak and watched her swim, free and unguarded. The kind of motion that only comes when a child knows the world around her has stopped watching to judge. Her laugh echoed across the pool deck, unrestrained, alive, familiar. The sound hit me like home. I thought about all the noise that used to fill this place, the emails, the threats, the lies wrapped in fine print, about Clorinda Roll and her empire of fear built out of signatures and bylaws. About the neighbors who'd looked away, then looked back too late. They'd all been part of it. We all had in some way. Silence is participation. It just hides behind politeness. Now, the quiet meant something else. It wasn't complicity. It was healing. By noon, the board had posted the new access policy on the clubhouse window. No secret administrative accounts, no unapproved devices, no private surveillance beyond community-approved infrastructure. Howard's handwriting was still visible in the printed memo's margins, a note that said all residents equal, no exceptions. That line alone was worth the fight. When I returned home, the house felt different, lighter. The shadows that had once stretched too long in the corners were just ordinary shades now. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint smell of coffee, the warmth of the late sun through the blinds. Everything felt real again. My phone buzzed once. A message from my handler. Case archived. Excellent work. Enjoy your peace, agent. Peace. The one thing I'd never learned to trust. I looked out the window, saw Alinea sitting at the pool's edge, swinging her legs in the water, talking to another kid I didn't recognize. That was how it should be. Two kids meeting, without paperwork, without permission. That was peace. I opened my field log one last time and added a single line beneath the case notes. Objective complete, damage minimal, recovery ongoing. Then I closed the file and deleted the local copy. When you've lived long enough around systems built to control people, you start to understand that victory isn't about dismantling them. It's about making them irrelevant. You teach people to see. You make them remember what fairness looks like. And when they start standing on their own again, you disappear. I stepped outside as Alinea waved me over. "Come on, Dad," she called. "The water's perfect." "Maybe later," I said. "You enjoy it for me." "You're scared you'll lose your edge." I smiled. "Maybe I already did." She laughed and dove again. The splash caught a slant of sunlight and scattered it into 100 shards across the surface, each one reflecting a little piece of the world, Clorinda. Couldn't touch anymore. I stood there a while, listening to the wind in the trees, to the sound of kids reclaiming what had been stolen, and for once I didn't analyze, didn't plan, didn't calculate. I just let it be, because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it ends quietly with a gate unlocking at sunrise, and a little girl finally free to swim in her own neighborhood. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?